The gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the penthouse.
Victor!
The sound so loud Davina felt it in her chest like a physical blow. She squeezed her eyes shut, curled her body around the twins, waiting for the impact, the pain, on the end. But it didn't come. Instead, she heard a grunt, a body hitting the floor, and Joon-woo's voice screaming a name she recognized. Victor. She opened her eyes to chaos. Victor lay on the marble floor between her and Kangday, blood blooming across his shoulder, spreading in a dark stain across his black tactical suit. He'd thrown himself in front of the bullet meant for her, taking it in the shoulder instead of letting it reach her chest, where Minseo's head had been resting. The security man who'd protected them through everything was gasping, clutching his wound, but alive. Alive. Joon-woo launched himself at his father with a roar of pure rage, tackling the old man before he could fire again. The gun skittered across the floor. Davina didn't think, just acted, running with both crying twins toward the hallway, toward the panic room Joon-woo had shown her weeks ago, the one she'd hoped they'd never need. She punched in the code with shaking fingers, pushed through the reinforced door, and pulled Victor inside with her remaining strength. He was heavy, bleeding, barely conscious. But he'd saved her life, and she wasn't leaving him to die. The twins were screaming, terrified by the gunshot and the blood and their mother's fear. Davina laid them in the corner on the soft carpet, grabbed the first aid kit from the panic room's supplies, and went to work. Her nursing training kicked in, overriding the terror. Assess the wound, apply pressure, stop the bleeding. She worked on Victor while the sounds of violence echoed from the living room, furniture breaking, men shouting, her hands steady even as her heart raced. The wound was through and through, missing the major arteries. Painful but survivable if she could stop the bleeding. She packed it, applied pressure, talked to Victor in a low, steady voice even as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us. You saved my babies." He managed a weak smile. "My job," he rasped. "Protect the family." And then sirens, beautiful, wonderful sirens getting closer. Someone had called the police, maybe a neighbor hearing the gunshot, maybe security protocols Joon-woo had in place. The sounds of fighting in the living room intensified, then stopped abruptly. Footsteps running, a door slamming, and then Joon-woo's voice outside the panic room, desperate. "Davina, let me in. It's me. He's gone. Please let me in." She opened the door to find him bloody and bruised, knuckles split, shirt torn, but alive. His father had escaped before the police arrived, disappearing like smoke, but not before leaving destruction in his wake. The penthouse looked like a war zone. Overturned furniture, blood on the marble floors, bullet hole in the wall where Davina had been standing. Joon-woo fell to his knees in front of her, pulled her and the twins into his arms, and shook. Just shook, his whole body trembling with the adrenaline crash and the horror of how close he'd come to losing them. The police and paramedics arrived minutes later, taking Victor to the hospital, taking statements, photographing evidence. And through it all, Joon-woo held on to Davina like she might disappear if he let go. Later, after the police had taken their statements and left, after Victor had been rushed to surgery and pronounced stable, after the babies were finally sleeping again in their cribs surrounded by extra security, Davina sat with Joon-woo in the wreckage of their living room. They were on the floor, too exhausted to care about the overturned furniture, just sitting against the wall watching the sunrise through the windows. "Your ex-fiancé," Davina said quietly, breaking the silence. Her timeline never made sense. 12 weeks from the gala would mean she got pregnant the same night I did. My twins are 3 weeks old. She should have been giving birth, not showing a first trimester ultrasound. Joon-woo looked up sharply, his bruised face showing surprise. "You noticed that?" "I was too hurt to process it at the time," Davina admitted. "But yeah, she wasn't just lying about you being the father. She was lying about being pregnant at all. The whole thing was a con." She shook her head. I should have trusted my instincts. He reached for her hand, his split knuckles gentle against her skin. I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself. I'm sorry my past keeps trying to destroy our future. She leaned her head on his shoulder, exhausted. Your father said this isn't over. He's coming back for the twins. I know, Joon-woo said quietly, which is why we're going to end this. Permanently. No more running. No more waiting for the next attack. We're taking the fight to him. But first, they had to survive the next week, which proved harder than either of them anticipated. Victor recovered from surgery, but needed weeks of physical therapy. Joon-woo hired additional security, turned the penthouse into a fortress, and started hunting for his father through every contact and connection he had. And Davina tried to keep their children safe while processing the fact that she'd almost died, that Victor had taken a bullet for her, that this cycle of violence seemed endless. She was so focused on the immediate threats that she almost missed the new one walking through their door. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, bypassing security with diplomatic credentials, claiming to be family. Davina answered the door to find a man she'd never seen before, African, in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, genuine smile that made her chest ache with unexpected longing. Davina, he said, his accent placing him as West African, possibly Nigerian. My God, you look just like your mother. I've been searching for you for years. She should have been suspicious immediately, should have questioned how he found her or why now, but she was so desperate for family, for someone from her past who wasn't connected to the Seo family violence, that she let him in. He introduced himself as James Admmy, claimed to be her father, the man who'd left before she was born, the man her mother never talked about. He had photos, documents, stories about her mother that only someone close to her would know. He spoke about her grandmother, her childhood home, details that made Davina's eyes fill with tears because finally, someone understood where she came from. He offered her a way out. Come with me, he said gently. You and the children. I have resources, protection, a life waiting in Lagos far from this violence. You don't have to stay in this world of guns and blood. You deserve better. Your children deserve better. And Davina, exhausted and terrified and so tired of being strong, almost said yes, almost packed up her babies and left with this man who claimed to be her salvation. But Joon-woo was suspicious from the start. Something's wrong, he told her, that night after James had left. The timing is too convenient. My father attacks, and suddenly your long-lost father appears offering rescue. Let me investigate him, please. Don't make any decisions until I know he's legitimate. Davina wanted to be angry, wanted to accuse him of jealousy or control, but the truth was his instincts had kept them alive this long, so she agreed to wait. And 3 days later, Joon-woo's investigators uncovered the truth that shattered her heart all over again. James Admmy wasn't her father. He was a rival crime lord, international arms dealer, someone her actual father had crossed decades ago. He'd been hired by Kangday to gain Davina's trust, convince her to leave with the twins, and deliver them directly into Kangday's hands. The photos were doctored. The stories were gathered from people who'd known her mother. Even the documents were elaborate forgeries. It was all a trap, and she'd almost walked right into it. When Joon-woo showed her the evidence, Davina felt something inside her break. Even the hope of family was being weaponized against her. Even her desperate wish for a father was being used to hurt her children. They confronted James together, with enough security to start a small war. He didn't even bother denying it once he realized they knew. Just smiled that same warm smile and shrugged. It was business, he said casually. Kangday pays well, and I needed access to the Seoul market. Your children are valuable leverage, nothing personal. Joon-woo had him arrested on multiple international warrants the investigators had uncovered, but the damage was done. Davina retreated into herself, became quieter, more guarded, jumped at every sound. She trusted no one outside their immediate circle, questioned every interaction, And Joon-woo watched her light dim with guilt that felt like knives in his chest. And then Minji returned, appearing at their door with a flash drive and a smile that promised destruction. She'd been working with both on Taeyang and Kangday from the beginning, planted to destabilize them emotionally before Kangday's return. The fake pregnancy was meant to make Davina leave so Kangday could take the twins easily. And now, she had more than just the assault footage. She had recordings of Joon-woo's illegal business dealings, transactions that could send him to prison for decades, evidence of money laundering, and connections to criminal enterprises that would destroy what was left of his legitimate business empire. Her demand was simple. Sign over legal custody of the twins to Kangday, admit publicly to your crimes, and disappear. Or I send everything to the prosecutors and you spend the rest of your life in prison while your father takes your children anyway. She stood in their foyer with that flash drive like it was a nuclear weapon, and in many ways it was. The power to destroy everything they'd built, everything they'd survived. But Joon-woo had been planning for this, had been recording every interaction with Minji since her return, documenting her conspiracy, gathering his own evidence. He pulled out his own flash drive and smiled. "Mutual destruction?" he said calmly. "I have proof of your conspiracy with my father and uncle to commit fraud, extortion, kidnapping conspiracy, and accessory to attempted murder. You send your files to the prosecutors, I send mine. We both go down. Or you walk away now and we pretend this never happened." Minji's perfect composure finally cracked. "You wouldn't," she hissed. "You'd go to prison." "I've made my peace with paying for what I've done," Joon-woo said quietly. "The question is, have you? Because I'm not 12-year-old me who was scared of his father anymore. I'm not the man who let fear make him into a monster. I'd rather face justice for my real crimes than let my children be used as pawns. Your move." She left without another word, and they never saw her again. Later, they heard she'd fled to Europe, disappeared into the criminal underground, the flash drives apparently destroyed or hidden. But the victory felt hollow because they both knew the real threat was still out there. The next 5 months passed in a strange limbo that felt like holding their breath underwater. Joon-woo worked with prosecutors, dismantling his father's networks piece by piece, following every lead, always waiting for retaliation that never came. Davina's pregnancy progressed steadily, her belly swelling with the baby made from love in Switzerland, the baby that represented hope instead of violence. She had regular checkups, everything progressing normally, despite the stress. The twins grew from helpless newborns to curious babies who rolled over, then sat up, then started crawling everywhere. Jiho was quiet and observant, watching everything, with solemn dark eyes. Minseo was fierce and determined, always trying to keep up with her brother. They celebrated small milestones that felt miraculous given everything they'd survived. First smiles, first giggles, first time sleeping through the night. Normal family moments that Davina had never thought she'd have. But the peace felt fragile, temporary, like walking on ice that could crack at any moment. Kangday was out there somewhere, planning something. They could feel it. Every unexpected sound made them jump. Every stranger's face was scrutinized. They lived in a constant state of low-grade terror masked by domestic routine. And at 32 weeks pregnant, barely into her 8th month, Davina's body finally gave out under the accumulated strain of months of fear and stress. If you're feeling this intensity and need to know what happens, hit that like button and subscribe to Afro-Korean World right now. This story is about to get even more insane. She was tired all the time, nauseous, dizzy. At first, she blamed the pregnancy and the sleepless nights with 2 crawling babies. But when she fainted while preparing bottles one morning, crumpling to the kitchen floor before Joon-woo caught her, he insisted on taking her to the doctor. The diagnosis came swift and terrifying. She was going into early labor. At 32 weeks, her body was trying to deliver the baby conceived in healing. the baby that was now fighting for its life because her mother's body was shutting down from chronic stress. They rushed her to the hospital, administered medication to stop the contractions, hooked her up to monitors that beeped warnings. The doctor was blunt. "We can delay labor for maybe a few days, maybe a week if we're lucky. But this baby is coming early. We need to prepare for a premature delivery and hope the lungs are developed enough to survive outside the womb. 32 weeks is viable but risky. There will be complications. The baby will need NICU care, possibly for weeks." Davina lay in the hospital bed with monitors strapped to her belly, listening to her baby's too fast heartbeat, and felt like she was being torn apart. This baby, this innocent child conceived in their moment of hope in Switzerland, was being threatened by the violence that wouldn't let them go, and she was helpless to stop it. Joon-woo stayed by her side, holding her hand, making calls to ensure the twins were safe with Victor's team and additional security at home. But 48 hours into her hospital stay, his phone rang with the call that brought his world crashing down. The twins were gone. Despite all the security, all the precautions, all the months of preparation, Kangday's men had found a way in. A delivery driver who was actually one of his operatives. A package with gas that knocked out the guards for crucial minutes. A window of time where they breached the nursery and took both babies, disappearing into Seoul's traffic before backup could respond. Ji-ho and Min-seo, 5 months old, taken. The ransom demand came an hour later. Kangday's voice on a recording delivered to Joon-woo's phone. "Transfer controlling interest in all your companies to me. Publicly announce you're stepping down due to criminal activities and name me as your successor. Sign a legal document giving me guardianship of your children. You have 48 hours or the twins disappear forever, raised as mine, and you'll never see them again. And if you're thinking of calling the police, remember that I have connections everywhere. They'll be in another country before anyone can act. Your choice, son. Your empire or your children. But you can't have both." Joon-woo looked at Davina, still in the hospital bed, at risk of losing their third baby, and felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. His father's violence, his own crimes, the empire built on blood that was now demanding more blood to maintain. And he knew, with absolute clarity, what he had to do. He couldn't pay the ransom, couldn't give his father legitimacy and power and control over his children. But he also couldn't let his babies disappear. So he did the one thing he'd never thought he'd do. He called his mother's lawyer. His mother, before she died, had left instructions that were only to be opened in extreme circumstances. A safety deposit box that required both her lawyer's key and biometric identification from Joon-woo to access. He'd ignored it for years, too angry at her for dying and leaving him to his father's mercies. But now, desperate, he had it opened. And inside found salvation in the form of evidence his mother had been gathering for decades. She documented everything. Years of his father's crimes, murders, trafficking operations, money laundering schemes, corruption, abuse. She'd recorded conversations, kept ledgers, gathered proof that would destroy Kangday completely. And she'd left a will, legally executed and notarized, that named Joon-woo as the sole heir to the legitimate parts of the Seo fortune and explicitly disinherited Kangday for documented criminal activities. But it was the letters that broke him. One to Joon-woo, written in her careful handwriting. "My son, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and your father has probably tried to destroy you. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I was weak when you needed me strong. But you are not your father. You have his strength, but you can choose to use it differently. Break the cycle. Be better. I forgive you for whatever you've become in grief. Now forgive yourself and build something new." And shockingly, impossibly, a letter addressed to someone she'd never met. "To the woman who survives my son's worst moment," it began. And Davina sobbed as Joon-woo read it to her in the hospital room. "If you're reading this, you've endured something terrible at his hands. I'm so deeply sorry. I know that apology means nothing from someone who wasn't there to stop it, but I need you to know that the boy I raised was kind. The man his father made him become is broken. But broken things can be repaired if someone is willing to do the work. Please don't give up on him. He needs someone strong enough to show him he can be different. And I have a feeling that if you survived him and are still in his life, you might be strong enough to save you both. How did she know? Davina whispered. How could she have known about me? Maybe she didn't, Joon-woo said quietly. Maybe she just knew someone would eventually bear the consequences of what my father made me. And she wanted to apologize in advance. To tell them I could be better, that I'm worth the effort. His voice broke. I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to try. For you. For our children. For the man she believed I could be. They used the evidence to track Kangday. His mother's ledgers included properties, safe houses, old contacts, and one location stood out, an abandoned SEO family estate in the mountains north of Seoul, the place where Joon-woo's father had trained him in violence as a child. Of course, he'd take the twins there. It was poetic, cyclical, exactly the kind of psychological torture Kangday would enjoy. Joon-woo prepared to leave for the estate, but Davina wasn't staying behind. Against medical advice, against every instinct for self-preservation, against the doctor's warnings about the baby, she checked herself out of the hospital. Her babies were in danger. Her children needed her. And she wasn't going to lie in a bed while someone else decided their fate. The premature labor had stopped for now, her body responding to the emergency with adrenaline that overrode everything else. She could deliver later. Right now, she had to save Ji-ho and Min-seo. She arrived at the mountain estate to find it surrounded by police and tactical teams. Joon-woo hadn't gone alone or rogue. He'd taken his mother's evidence to the prosecutors, confessed to his own crimes, and offered full cooperation in exchange for help rescuing his children. The authorities had been building a case against Kangday for years, but could never gather enough evidence. Now they had everything they needed, handed to them by his son. But Kangday had barricaded himself inside with the twins, heavily armed, and was demanding his son come face him alone, or he'd kill the babies. A hostage situation with 5-month-old children as shields. Joon-woo was preparing to go in unarmed, wearing a wire when Davina arrived. Security tried to stop her, but she pushed past them, found him by the command center, grabbed his arm. I'm coming with you, she said, leaving no room for argument. Those are my children, and I'm not waiting outside while you play hero. He started to argue, saw the look in her eyes, the set of her jaw, the determination that had kept her alive through everything, and just nodded. Together then, he said quietly. The way it should have been from the start. They approached the estate together, hands raised, unarmed as demanded, wearing hidden microphones that transmitted everything to the police. And Kangday let them in with a smile that promised violence. The inside of the estate was exactly as dark as Davina had imagined. Old furniture covered in dusty sheets, portraits of Seo ancestors watching from walls with dead eyes, and the smell of decay and old violence soaked into the walls. Kangday stood in what had once been a grand living room, both twins in infant carriers at his feet, crying and red-faced. A gun was in his hand. He'd aged since that night in the penthouse, but the cruelty in his eyes was unchanged. Welcome home, son, he said to Joon-woo. I thought it fitting we end where we began. This is where I taught you what it means to be a Seo, where I beat the weakness out of you after your mother tried to make you soft. And now I'll do the same with your son. He looked at Ji-ho with proprietorial satisfaction. He has potential. I'll train him properly. Over my dead body, Davina said, her voice steady despite her terror, despite being 8 months pregnant and barely able to stand. Kangday laughed. That can be arranged. You're nothing but a vessel, girl. Your purpose was served when you birthed Seo heirs. Now you're just in the way. He raised the gun, pointed it at her swollen belly where their third child grew, and Davina saw her death approaching for the second time. But then another voice spoke from the shadows, a voice she recognized with dawning horror. "Actually, father, I think we should keep her alive a little longer." Tae-yang stepped out from behind a covered piece of furniture, very much alive, smiling like this was all a game. "She might be useful for keeping our dear Joon-woo compliant." The uncle who was supposed to be dead, who Kangday had supposedly captured and killed, was alive and smiling. "Of course," Joon-woo said bitterly. "Of course you were working together. The escape, the blackmail, the warehouse video, everything. All planned. All theater." Tae-young spread his hands. "What can I say? When father contacted me from wherever he'd been hiding and proposed an alliance, I couldn't refuse. Between his connections and my knowledge of your operations, we make quite a team. And now we have everything we need. The children, the evidence destroyed, and you about to sign over your empire. We'll raise these twins properly. The boy will be a real CEO. The girl will marry off for alliances. And that thing in her belly," he gestured at Davina dismissively, "we don't need it. One bullet solves that problem." "But here's where you made your mistake," Joon-woo said calmly, too calmly, his hand moving slowly to his pocket. "You assumed I'd choose the empire over my family? You can't imagine someone making a different choice than you would. You think everyone operates from the same selfishness and cruelty that drives you. So you didn't prepare for the possibility that I'd burn it all down." He pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of police radios and tactical team communications. "This entire conversation has been broadcast to every officer surrounding this building. They have probable cause to breach now. You have about 30 seconds before they come through every door and window. Your move." Kangday's face contorted with rage. He moved toward the twins, gun swinging down toward Jiho's carrier, and Davina didn't think. She threw herself forward. No weapon, no plan, just a mother's desperate need to save her child. 8 months pregnant, exhausted, terrified, but unstoppable. She hit Kangday's arm as he pulled the trigger, the shot going wide, shattering a window. They fell together, grappling for the gun. He was stronger, trained, vicious, a lifetime of violence making him lethal. But she was a mother fighting for her babies, and that made her dangerous in ways he couldn't anticipate. Joon-woo grabbed both infant carriers with the crying twins and ran for the door, getting them out of the line of fire. Tae-young tried to stop him, but police were breaching, flooding in through doors and windows, shouting commands, tactical gear, and weapons everywhere. In the chaos and smoke from the flashbangs, Davina and Kangday fought for the gun on the floor. He got his hand around her throat, squeezing, her vision darkening, the baby in her belly moving frantically. "You should have stayed dead," he hissed into her face. "Should have disappeared when you had the chance. Now you die knowing I'll raise your children to be monsters just like me. I'll tell them their mother was weak, that she abandoned them, that you didn't love them enough to survive." The gun was between them, pressed against his chest by the angle of their struggle and her pregnant belly. Davina's finger found the trigger. She thought about everything he'd done, everyone he'd hurt, the cycle of violence he represented and refused to end. She thought about her children growing up in his shadow, becoming what he'd made Joon-woo. She thought about all the victims of his cruelty over decades, all the lives destroyed by his choices, and she pulled the trigger. The sound was muffled by his body, intimate and terrible. He looked surprised, then angry, then nothing at all as he collapsed on top of her. She pushed him off with the last of her strength, gasping for air, staring at her hands covered in his blood. She'd killed him. A nurse who'd devoted her life to saving people, who'd taken an oath to do no harm, had just taken a life. Police swarmed the room, securing Tae-young, who'd surrendered the moment his brother died, realizing the game was over. Securing the scene, calling for medical, checking for other threats. Joon-woo ran back in once it was clear, found Davina sitting on the floor covered in his father's blood, shaking, and pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "You saved them. You saved us all. It's finally over." But Davina couldn't stop shaking, couldn't process what she'd done. "I killed him," she said. "I became a monster to stop a monster. What does that make me?" He cupped her face, made her look at him, his eyes fierce and certain. "It makes you a mother," he said. "There's a difference. He would have killed our children and corrupted them if he'd lived. You did what you had to do. That's not being a monster. That's being strong enough to make the hardest choice. That's being the hero of the story." The aftermath was a blur of police statements, medical examinations, hospital stays. The twins were checked thoroughly, physically unharmed, but needing monitoring for trauma responses. Davina was hospitalized immediately, the stress and physical struggle having triggered contractions again. But this time, the doctors managed to stop the labor, keep the baby inside for a few more crucial weeks. She spent the next 3 weeks on strict bed rest, barely speaking, processing what she'd done. A court-appointed therapist visited daily, helping her work through the justified homicide, the self-defense, the maternal protection that had driven her actions. Slowly, painfully, she began to accept that she'd done what was necessary, that saving her children didn't make her a monster, that she could live with what she'd done because the alternative was unthinkable. Joon-woo stayed by her side, handled everything else, gave his full cooperation to the prosecutors investigating the entire SEO criminal network. His testimony, combined with his mother's evidence, brought down dozens of corrupt officials, criminal associates, and trafficking rings. He was offered a deal: full immunity for his cooperation in dismantling his father's organization, but he had to forfeit everything. Every asset tied to illegal activity, every connection to the criminal empire, every dollar that came from blood money. He'd keep what was legitimately earned through legal businesses, which was almost nothing compared to the billions he'd once controlled. No penthouse, no private security army, no power, just a normal life. And he took the deal without hesitation. "I don't want my children to inherit blood money," he told the prosecutors. "I want them to inherit a father who chose to be better. That's the only legacy worth having." If this story has you hooked and you need to see how this ends, smash that like button and subscribe. Comment episode 4 below, because what comes next will shock you. 3 weeks later, Davina went into labor for real. At 35 weeks, still early, but much safer than before. The contractions started gently in the afternoon and built slowly, giving them time to get to the hospital, settle the twins, with Davina's mother, who'd flown in from the States, prepare for the delivery. A baby girl arrived after 6 hours of labor, tiny but fierce, who came out screaming her rage at the world and didn't stop for an hour. They named her Hope because that's what she represented. Hope that something beautiful could grow from all the violence and pain. Hope that their family could survive anything. Hope that the cycle was finally, truly broken. She was small, just over 4 pounds, and needed a few weeks in the NICU to gain weight and strength. But she was a fighter, just like her mother. Joon-woo was charged with his past crimes, the ones his immunity deal didn't cover. Minor offenses compared to his father's atrocities, but still requiring accountability. He was sentenced to 1 year in a minimum security facility, time to be served starting 3 months after Hope's birth so he could be there for those crucial early months. He took the sentence with grace, knowing he deserved far worse. Grateful it wasn't more, and he used those 3 months to help Davina transition their lives completely. They moved from the penthouse to a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet Seoul suburb, the kind of neighborhood where kids played in the street and neighbors brought over casseroles. Joon-woo got a job in legitimate business consulting, using his strategic mind for legal purposes, helping small companies with growth strategies. Davina returned to nursing part-time once Hope was strong enough, working at a community clinic serving low-income families. They drove a normal car, shopped at normal stores, lived a normal life on a normal budget. And it was strange and difficult and absolutely beautiful. The twins grew from helpless babies to curious toddlers who explored everything. Jiho was quiet and thoughtful, more comfortable with books than people, observing the world with solemn dark eyes that missed nothing. Minji was fierce and protective, always the first to try new things, to climb higher, to push boundaries. She appointed herself Hope's guardian, watching over her baby sister with an intensity that made Davina's heart ache, and Hope was the bridge between them all, somehow both and neither, carrying features of both parents in a face that was entirely her own. She smiled earlier than the twins had, laughed more easily, as if she knew she was the child of healing and carried that knowledge in her bones. Joon-woo served his year, starting when Hope was 3 months old. Davina visited every week with the children, 3 babies that turned heads in the visiting room of the minimum security facility. She waited for him, built their life around the idea that he was coming home, never doubted. And he did. Exactly 1 year after Kangday's death, he walked out of prison into a life he'd never imagined. Small, quiet, normal, and happier than he'd ever been. The twins were walking and talking in short sentences. Hope was crawling everywhere. And Davina was waiting with a smile that made everything worth it. 6 months after his release, on a spring evening with cherry blossoms falling like snow, Joon-woo took Davina to the park where they'd walked in Switzerland during Jiho's treatment. The children were with Davina's mother, who'd moved to Seoul to be near her. Grandchildren, and had forgiven Davina for everything, understanding finally what survival looked like. They stood under the blooming trees, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and pink, and he knelt. He'd knelt before, in Switzerland, asked before, but this time was different. This time there was no empire, no contract, no obligation, just a man asking a woman if she'd spend her life with him. Davina Lawrence, he said, and his voice shook with emotion. I destroyed you. I rebuilt you. We survived hell together and came out the other side, somehow still standing. I have nothing to offer you but a normal life with a man who's trying every day to be better than what he was. I can't promise perfection. I can't promise we won't have hard days or that my past won't cast shadows sometimes. But I can promise I will choose you every single time, over power or pride or fear. I will choose our family. I will be the man my mother believed I could be and the father our children deserve. Will you marry me? Not because of a contract or obligation, not because of our children, though I love them more than life, but because you want to. Because you choose me the way I choose you. She looked at him, this complicated man who'd been her worst nightmare and her greatest defender, the monster who'd learned to be human, and knew her answer had always been yes. You chose me over your empire, she said softly. You gave up everything to keep us safe. You faced your father and broke a cycle of violence that had lasted generations. You went to prison to pay for what you'd done. That's the man I fell in love with. Not the powerful heir everyone feared, but the father who sings lullabies off-key and burns dinner and chooses healing over revenge every single day. Yes. I'll marry you. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because you're the best man I know, and that's saying something given how you started. They married 2 months later in a small ceremony, with both families present. The ones who'd accepted them. The ones who'd forgiven or never needed to forgive. Davina's mother walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down her face. Joon-woo's mother's family came. The cousins and aunts who'd disowned Kangday years ago and welcomed his son's redemption with open arms. The twins were flower girl and ring bearer, barely coordinated toddlers dropping petals everywhere and making everyone laugh. Hope was held by her grandmother, watching everything with wide, curious eyes. And everyone cried because it was beautiful and improbable and everything a wedding should be. 2 broken people choosing to build something new from the pieces. A family forged in fire and violence, learning to exist in peace. The reception was in a modest venue. Nothing like the luxury they'd once known, but filled with genuine love. They danced to music that made the twins giggle. They ate cake that Joon-woo had helped bake, slightly lopsided but delicious. They laughed with friends, who'd stood by them through everything. And in a quiet moment, Davina pulled Joon-woo aside. "I need to tell you something," she said, and he went still, reading her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she assured him quickly. "I'm pregnant, again. 4 months along. I didn't know until last week because with 3 kids I just thought I was tired." Surprise. He stared at her, processing, then laughed. The kind of laugh that came from deep in the chest, pure joy and disbelief and overwhelming love. 4 children, he said. "We're going to have 4 children under 3 years old. I can barely handle 3. "You're going to be amazing," she said. "You already are. And this time, this baby, we get to enjoy the whole pregnancy without anyone trying to kill us. That's new. That's nice." They held each other on their wedding night, in a hotel room that wasn't a penthouse, with their children sleeping in the next room with Grandma, and felt peace settle over them like a blanket. Real peace. The kind that came from surviving and choosing joy anyway. But peace never lasts forever. 2 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday, while Davina was at work at the clinic and Joon-woo was home with the children, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a woman he'd never seen before, Western, maybe American, with sharp eyes and credentials, identifying her as FBI International Division. "Mr. CEO," she said, her expression grave. "We need to talk about your father." "He's dead," Joon-woo said flatly. "I was there. My wife killed him in self-defense. It's documented, justified, closed." The agent shook her head. "Actually," she said, and the world tilted. "That's what we need to discuss. We finally got DNA results back on the body from the Mountain Estate. Standard procedure for international criminal cases. The man who died that day doesn't match Kangday's records. Dental records, DNA, fingerprints, nothing matches. We don't know who he was, but your real father, the actual Kangday, he's still out there." The world stopped. Everything they'd survived, everything they'd sacrificed, the man Davina had killed to save their children, had been a decoy, an imposter, a body double elaborate enough to fool everyone, which meant the real Kangday, the actual monster, had been watching this entire time, watching them think they'd won, watching them relax into peace, watching them build a life he could destroy. And now, they had even less protection, fewer resources, no empire to shield them. Just a normal family that had made the most dangerous enemy in the world. Joon-woo closed the door, locked it with shaking hands, went to where his children were playing in the living room. Ji-ho building blocks with intense concentration. Min-seo coloring with wild abandon. Hope sleeping in her playpen, thumb in her mouth. He looked at them, his whole world, 3 perfect children and a 4th on the way, and knew that the fight wasn't over. It had never been over. It was just beginning. And this time, he had everything to lose and nothing to fight with except love and determination. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Unknown number. His hand shook as he answered, already knowing, dreading. "Hello, son," his father's voice said. The real one this time. And Joon-woo felt ice flood his veins. "Did you really think a body double would fool me into thinking you'd won? That was just a test. To see how far you'd go. How much you'd sacrifice. What you'd become. And now I know everything. You'd give up power for them. You'd go to prison for them. You'd let your wife become a killer for them. Which makes them the perfect leverage. Because now I know exactly how to break you. See you soon, son. We have so much to discuss. Starting with my grandchildren's education." The line went dead. Joon-woo stood in his modest living room, surrounded by children's toys and normal life and everything he'd built from the ashes of his old existence, and realized the nightmare had never ended. It had just been waiting, gathering strength, planning. His real father was coming. The man who'd created the man who destroyed Davina. The original monster. And this time, there would be no escape, no evidence, no immunity deal. Just a reckoning that had been delayed but never avoided. If you need to know what happens next, if you're ready for the real confrontation, comment episode 4 below right now. The final battle is coming and nobody is safe. The real CEO Kangday is about to show his son what true evil looks like.